I'm Cyclon, and today I want to share with you my build, the Lightning Arrow Deadeye with Omniscience and Trinity. I think I'm finally at a point where this is shareable, this is improved enough, ripened enough to be able to make a build guide out of it, and in the comments you will find my my passive building for this build. Okay, that out of the way, I want to first cover the quick question, why Lightning Arrow? And why you see Tornado Shot down there while I use Barrage in some of the videos. Well, the reason is simple. Lightning Arrow, I wanted to use it. I wanted to farm Legion. Lightning Arrow is super good for farming Legion, and so I used Lightning Arrow. You can use Tornado Shot, you can use Ice Shot, it's pretty much similar. However, I think for Ice Shot and Tornado Shot, going with physical conversion is better, but physical conversion is also more pricey, so I would say Lightning Arrow is cheaper to start with as well. Okay, so why am I using Tornado Shot then when I just said Lightning Arrow is cheaper? I'm using Tornado Shot on Ballista to improve my single target. This is not really needed early on, but later on for doing some bit stronger bosses like Guardians or Conquerors, it does improve, and for doing something like Blights or doing Expedition, it does help. For doing Delirious Mapping, it does help, and for doing Delirium Mirror, it helps. Outside of that, Barrage is more than enough, and it does quite suffice. Okay. Also, I'm not using Storm Rain or Physical Conversion yet. Storm Rain didn't look that good on my testing, and Physical Conversion is too pricey, as already mentioned. I already said something about price investment level. To get this started, I think you need about 10 to 15 exalts. Most of that will be the cost of getting a 6-link body armor and then getting an inspired learning. Outside of that, the stuff can be quite cheap if you know what to look for, and I think I will cover that quite nicely in this video. And that out of the way, let's get into the build. What can it do? Well, it is a mapper. It is made for mapping, it is made for running maps fast and efficient. And that means the survivability is so-so. It has an okay survivability pool. Later investment stages will have a better survivability pool. I got up to level 96. If you do not run bosses, if you do not run super juice delirium maps, you won't die a lot. This build has a quite nice survivability. The reason why I died 166 times and why I died why I died 166 times was because I tested out a lot of stuff. Some of them weren't as good, some of them were good. So I tried out a lot of stuff, and I ran some maps that weren't yet in my range of capability for this build. So those caused my deaths. But it can level quite nicely, and you will be able to get a good amount of levels on this build. Normal mapping, super delirium mapping, maybe up to 60% on a low investment or mid investment, I guess. And after that, you will need a high investment for this build. Simulacrum is just a big no. This does not have the survivability to run 30 raids in a Simulacrum. Because we are using with a good amount of flat damage and a lot of penetration, at some point where the enemies have 70% less damage taken, you will not be able to do enough damage. And it doesn't have a high enough effective hit pool that it can tank the hits you will gain at those delirium levels, which is why you will need a higher investment. And even then, it will rely on Headhunter to run like 100% delirious maps or super juice delirium mirrors. Okay. Bossing, it does have the damage for bossing. It has good amount of damage, especially once you go with the ballista totems, but with this tornado shot totems. But it is not enough for the pinnacle bosses. I don't recommend this for pinnacle bossing. I do recommend this for mapping. And that's survivability, as mentioned. It is quite good survivability. It will suffice for leveling, for getting high level, but it will not suffice for getting to kill the bosses like Eater of Worlds with 100 quantity or Uber Elder stuff. You will need to dodge everything they throw at you because you cannot take such a big hit. You don't have a big maximum hit pool that you can tank. Okay. So let's take a look at my passive tree, and first my Ascendency. I will move to passive building for that, as it is easier to cover here. Now, during leveling, I would say early on Farshot is quite nice, but I think once you are in maps, Ricochet, Endless Munition, Gathering Winds, and Focal Point are the best slot Ascendancies. Now, why is that so? Ricochet is +1 chain on our single target and clear. Now if you have barrage and you have 2 map bosses, you fire your barrage at one map boss and it chains to the other one. So on top of having every arrow with sniper's marks that split off to the other one, you have all those arrows that fire at him. Well, do I have to say more? You can kill both bosses at the same time. Super good, super awesome damage for mapping. And it helps with your clear, your lightning arrows. We are using chain early on, awaken fork later. +1 chain means more damage, more clear. Perfect. And this munition, the same thing. More damage for your single target, more clear for your lightning arrow. Perfect for this build. Tailwind, good old tailwind. It is really just awesome. You don't need it on your boots, so you can use the new eldritch influence on the boots. You have gathering winds, you have tailwind, you have increased tailwind effectiveness per gale force. Super fast attack speed, super fast movement speed. It just feels really nice. Now some people might want to take Windward, however I do not like that for one simple reason. If you get hit, you lose all your movement speed, you lose all your attack speed, you cannot run away anymore afterwards, and you cannot kill them fast enough maybe. But Windward is not the one, I don't like it too much. Also later on we do want to run with Determination instead of Grace, so we will get hit more often, especially in juiced maps, so Windward isn't that good. Lastly, we are using Focal Point. Now some people might argue why not Partial instead of Focal Point. Well, Focal Point has increased effect of our mark. So we apply our mark on one enemy, we shoot our arrows at him, and everything that hits him will use Sniper's Mark to split off, so even more clear. Also, less damage taken, so if there are like 2 unique Beyonders, we mark one and we take less damage from the other one, or from the whatever's around him. So it is more survivability too. And lastly, sometimes we do not have the mana to transition with Sniper Mark or hit on other enemies, so then Focal Point, your mark transfers to another enemy when one enemy dies, does come in clutch in that case. Farshot simply just gives damage, and this one gives survivability, clear, and damage. So much better. Okay, the rest of our tree is also pretty straightforward. We are using life, crit, bow damage, and crit damage, as well as some projectile damage, projectile speed, spell suppression, and percentage stats. Now I will not cover everything in detail, I will point out some interesting things. Early on we can use Wind Dancer while we're still in the evasion version to get a good amount of effective hit pool and maximum life. Quickly checking that I'm on the basic gear to have effective life here proper. So we use this for survivability. Wind Dancer. We have Charisma for our reservation. We are using Utmost Swiftness because we are using Omniscience. We get the Dexterity as percentage Omniscience, and we anoint Utmost Might or Utmost Intellect to gain another percentage stat. On the Attribute Mastery, you need to check yourself based on how many masteries you have allocated, if percentage attributes or Strength, Int, or Dex per allocated mastery is better. Now, the last thing that I want to cover, which is important, or I guess 2 more things, or 3 more things, I guess. Accuracy is required, because we're not getting any accuracy from our dexterity, so we need the accuracy from other nodes, which we will get by accuracy. Otherwise, we are using Marked for Death to get Culling Strike and Frenzy Charge on hit. We are using Point Blank for our improved single target damage. And we are using a Lionized Fall over here to gain the Claw and Dagger Mastery for more crit stuff, and getting Claw Mastery life on hit, combining it with Leech with Fuel of Fight and Feed the Fury. If you do not have the cluster yet, you can get Clever Thief for the Leech, and or life and mana on hit for the life gain on hit, and the Claw Mastery for the Leech however works, 2 points, spend however you see fit. When later on we place it with the cluster. And afterwards the cluster martial prowess, more accuracy rating as already covered. Now you will also use Inspired Learning before you can get a Headhunter, because it's more, it gives you a tiny Headhunter buff. Well, one part of the Headhunter I guess, and later on you can replace it with a Lethal Pride, and you can get a medium cluster with Repeat and Streamlined. Also we will spec out of Entrenched for spell suppression and go for Quick Step, which does require us to get a bit more spell suppression on gear, which I will cover then. Lastly, there is a high upgrade you can do with getting Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh for Master Surgeon. However, that is very pricey, but it gives you quite a bit amount of tankiness. Not for high hit, no, but for many tiny hits. As you gain a flask charge on every crit, so you have flask on crit and flask on getting hit, giving you almost 100% uptime on all flask, if not 120% or more uptime on all flask while macking. And you're permanently removing corrupted blood and bleeding, so you don't need a jewel for that. And lastly, recover life, which is super awesome. For the Watcher's Eye in either version, I would say precision, crit multi, and life, because it already has life always, and is better than a double crit multi life. That is pretty much the 3 out of 3. Everything else is noted down here. The masteries, you can always feel free to check that. I will leave the POB in the comments not comments, in the description, of course. Let's take a look at the skill section. For our skills, we are using Lightning Arrow as our main skill, of course, with Mirage Archer, greater multiple projectiles, and Chain to utilize for more clear. However, Chain isn't as good as you think. Now, Lightning Arrow, of course, out of the way, Trinity Inspiration for our damage. We need Inspiration to get the reduced mana cost. Outside of, if we do not use it that way, it would cost too much. Now, why do I say Chain isn't that good? Let's take the number example. Let's say you have 8 arrows. So Lightning Arrow fires 8 arrows. 8. Now you chain, so you take these 8 arrows times 3. Okay, that's 24 arrows, but isn't too bad. Because 2 from that, 1 from mastery. 24 arrows, each hits 3 additional times, so we have 24 hits. Plus, what was it? 60, 72, 86 hits, if I can calculate correctly. Which is quite good clear. But now let's take a look at Awakened Fork, which we want to get into ASAP. We keep everything else, we just replace Chain with Awakened Fork. Now you have your 8 arrows. Then they're going to fork once. So instead of 8, you have 24. You have 16 arrows. So that's already... That's 16 arrows, 8 are already the 24. Now, Awakened Fork forks an additional time. So your 16 arrows are going to fork again to 32 arrows. So that's 32 arrows, which then still has the 1 chain remaining, so they can chain in any direction. Which is nice, as your fork goes forwards, and your chain then can go backward to whatever hasn't been hit yet, or go further branching out. So you have your 32, which is basically 64, plus 16, which is 84. 64 plus the 16 is 80, plus the 8 initial is 88. And all those 88 have the 3 additional hits. So that is 88 times 3 is 240, 264. 264 hits. Just compare that to the 80 something hit with the chain. It's absolutely insane. So much more hits, so much more clear. And as far as I know, at least, Lightning Arrow 1 hits enemy A. Lightning Arrow 2 of the same salvo hits enemy B. The lightnings with additional hits can hit each other. So that means you can pretty much just take so much damage on enemies with just a clear skill alone. It is quite insane. I can just recommend using Awakened Fork over Chain or Awakened Chain. Now, GMP, if you have enough arrows otherwise, you don't need GMP anymore, you can replace that. However, I liked it quite much so far, and I didn't need the additional damage. This would then, I guess, be needed for having a running higher content like Delirium Mirror. As for our single target, Barrage with the Hypothermia Trinity increase critical damage, inspiration, and elemental damage with attacks. Pure damage, pure single target, not much to say. Now let's go to the interesting part 2. Our auras. We are using Grace, Herald of Ice, Precision, and Defiance banner. But now you wonder, wait, you've seen me use Hatred in the videos. Well, I am using Hatred. I'm using Blessed Hatred. I'm using a level 1 Divine Blessing, life tap and increased duration supporting my Hatred. Now it is a falling, it is quite a socket investment into getting this, but it costs about 1.3k life on my current build if we take a look here. Having Hatred, 1.3k life, use it. Yep, I said I use it. And now I have it for 15 seconds. I have Hatred, 15 seconds, so I use it before a Legion, combining it with the Divine Sun, which I will also use then, to have a good amount of burst damage, and just firing everything, killing everything quickly, then killing everything again, or use it in front of a boss, or use it in front of an expedition. Just before something big happens, I use it, and if you have some head-to-head buffs, you don't even feel the life loss. And even without them, you have Life Gun and Hit, Life Leech, and the Life Flask, which will increase recovery. It is so easy to regain your life in a matter of a second that you don't even notice it. So that are our auras out of the way. We are using Herald of Ice. It barely gives us any damage, but it gives us the ice explosions, which are a nice thing to shatter the stuff. Now we are using Sniper's Mark on hit. Sniper's Mark is just pure damage. It's super awesome, and Mark on hit gives us only a tiny bit reduced effect, which we balance out with Focal Point. And if we don't have the mana to use Mark on hit, which is giving a mana multiplier when we cast it, well, we have our Mastery to replace it instead. And lastly, Blood Rage and any mobility skill, dash, blink arrow, flame dash, everything works super fine. Now we have some alternative quality or awakened skill gems we can use. For our lightning arrow, we can use Phantasmal, which gives us an additional chance to hit. Mirage Archer has additional arrows, so even more clear. Now the -2 seconds are whatever for us. For the different examples, we use Barrage single target. Okay, we fire a lightning arrow and then suddenly there's an enemy in front of us. We kill it in a matter of 2 seconds. So the lightning arrow, the Mirage Archer fires 1 second, disappears, Barrage, kills the enemy, and we use our lightning arrow again. With the totems, different scenario. We are using focus ballista support, so we need to continue use our lightning arrow, so we have constant Mirage Archer up. So no downtime. Either way, super good Anomalous. For inspiration, we can use either Anomalous or Divergent. However, I do prefer Anomalous to get the critical strike chance to have more consistent crits. And then Awakened GMP, Awakened Fork. Awakened GMP isn't really that much here. It gives you an additional arrow, which is nice, but you're already firing a lot of arrows, and it's more than enough. The 20 GMP would be more than enough, and later on you won't even fully replace it with damage. Barrage, we can use Divergent for additional attack speed. And Hypothermia, we can use Divergent for additional cold pen if we freeze the enemy. Lastly, Awaken elemental damage with attacks, now pure more damage. And on the highest level, we cannot take Reflect if we use this on Lightning Arrow and Barrage. It still won't be enough because of how many arrows we fire and how much mana we consume. There will be basic attacks mixed in. So don't get confused if you use Awaken elemental damage level 5 on both and you die to Reflect. You will fire basic attacks, and the basic attacks, especially if you have head-hunter buffs, will convert physical to elemental or give you increased physical damage, and you can just kill yourself with that. Do not expect to be Reflect immune with this build. And lastly, we can use Divergent Blood Rage if we want some elemental damage leech. However, the leech we already have is more than enough, you don't really need this. Now, we do have an alternative single target. I already mentioned that, we have Tornado Shot. We use Tornado Shot with Ballista and Focus Ballista totems and Inspiration and elemental damage with attacks, and then either Hypothermia increase critical damage or multiple totems. Now, I want to show quickly that they do have all the same damage, so if we say include in full DPS. Right now, with our setup, we have 1.4 million damage with 3 totems. Now if we say, okay, how much damage do we have with critical damage? 1.46 and multiple totems. Now, multiple totems gives us 2 totems, so we need to increase the count, which is also 1.46. So they all give about the same, and it's really just a question of what you're coloring. If you say, okay, I'm coloring, you want the 3 red, 2 green, and then either one for the last spot. Blue, red, green, doesn't matter. You can put something in there for all the colors, which will definitely ease up the coloring. Now we do have a different in-game aura setup, which once we get enlightened level 3 and we improve our helmet to have a reservation efficiency, we can use a Herald, Hatred, Determination on Enlightened, and use a Precision, preferably Anomalous, on level 10 to 12, and a Defiance banner. And then we have a consistent Enlightened setup, consistent Hatred, and we can use whatever aura, or we can use whatever we want with the life tap thing. We can use different things like Tornado, we can use a Molten Shell, we can use, what else is there? We can use and enhance on our sniper's mark, we just empty up the spots to improve our survivability or damage, and we have more consistent auras. Now the items. Items, I've made expensive gear and basic gear. Now the expensive gear is quite a step up, and it's like a bigger package, but the basic gear is more than enough for mapping. Now starting with the bow, of course. We want a bow with triple elemental damage, T3 or above, and then having either attack speed or critical strike chance as a suffix, and then crafting the other if doable. Later on, I guess a +2 arrow would be nice, or completely transitioning into fist bow, but this will be more than enough to start this to get to T16 mapping. I got my bow in the market for 2x, which was quite nice, and it doesn't even have attack speed, but I still fire so many arrows, so really cheap bow to get started. The quiver, we do want a +1 arrow, life, and increased damage with bow skills, which is newly introduced this league. And then we want it on a base with either projectile speed, elemental damage with attacks, or crit chance. And we can craft elemental damage with attack skills, which was actually replaced with damage with bow skills, but the craft does still exist. So we can get the craft and we can get the replaced mod. We have both as a prefix, super amazing for a good amount of damage. The helmet, early on whatever, but quickly transitioning into the Blizzard Crown for getting the added flat cold, and then rolling it with any flat stat and life. Maybe a bit of spell suppression or resistances are nice to have, but we can cover those elsewhere. Body armor, high-risk ire, 5 link early on, 6 link very quickly to have enough single target. Added cold, high amount of evasion, flat dexterity, and spell suppression. Early on it's unbeatable, but later on you can replace it with a rare chest. Utilize the new eldritch implicit for stuff like aura effect. The gloves, we do want to use Puho Arte Temple mod gloves, which gives us cold resistance and increased damage with hits against shield enemies, life, and spell suppression. And later on with some gear, with some tree changes, we do need the implicit, the Eldritch Eater of World implicit for suppressed spell damage, as well using the Searing Exarch implicit to intimidate on hit. Both are rollable on the lowest currency, on the lowest tier, and are fairly common. In the boots, we want life, resistance, and using the Veiled order, either crafting it, preferably already rolled on it, with movement speed and chance to onslaught. With tailwind and onslaught, we don't need elusive. We almost have the mirror tier, or not mirror tier, but the high tier elevated boots, which have tailwind and onslaught, and now we have it super cheap because we already have tailwind. I really like this version more than getting any pricey, and you can use Eldritch Implicits on top. Now for the amulet, pretty locked in. Crystallite Omniscience, I already mentioned the anointment. I did Atmos White, but Atmos Intellect is as good. And for the wall, 23 or above is good. I would say you don't need this corrupted, but however I can understand if people want to go for a corrupted one, but that will definitely increase the price by a lot. Our rings, we are using an amethyst ring with triple stats and preferable life or crafted minus cost. But if you have no life on it, you can just craft life and you're good to go. The other ring, we want life, chaos resistance, or any resistance we are still missing, and then craft some negative cost, and we're good to go. Now for ring bases, I would say amethyst rings to get your chaos resistance up, or vermilion rings to get your life percentage up. However, vermilions might be pricey, amethyst rings aren't as pricey. The belt, we have a nice budget option, Nomad, giving us flat strength and flat dexterity, and we can use percentage stats here, but not really needed, and it gives us a bit fast charge gain, which is nice. But we very quickly want to get the Headhunter in this build, as it will just make the mapping so much better, so much smoother. But again, Headhunter is pricey, so the Nomad is just simulating the flat stats we get from Headhunter, so we don't have to adjust gear when we replace the Nomad with the Headhunter, or we have to get more than needed stats before we have access to the Headhunter. Our flasks are very straightforward. We want your utility flask to have the thinnest or better to gain 5+ charges when we are getting hit, and using either reduced curse effectiveness, no ignite, no bleed, increased critical strike chance, and we want one with increased evasion rating, preferable on the Jade. And then we are also using a Dying Sun with either increased charge recovery or increased duration, just so we have it for the important moments. If you don't want to use this way, feel free to just use it on full. However, I think this one is a bit more consistent. You just need to press a flask, like whenever something important happens. And lastly, our life flask. I lately really like the more recovery if used on low life. However, any implicit that is used, like seething, is still good. And on suffix, we take the immunity to bleeding, immunity to poison, or immunity to ignite. I would say bleeding, because bleeding is the most common thing that you get affected with, and you can get elemental avoidance on the tree. And poison isn't that common, especially now that we don't have to run Hunter Influence anymore. Already covered the jewels, so we are pretty much done with the build guide. I do want to quickly mention something about the leveling. There are 3 different ways you can level this. You can say, I'm not going to go for this at all, I'm going to level it with Poisonous Concoction and going to do fully respecking. That is totally fine. However, if you do want to say, I want to level this, I want to be a Lightning Arrow, there's again the choice, Shrink leveling or normal leveling. Now for normal leveling, I would say get a Cool Rain ASAP and you're good to go. And maybe a Tabula afterwards, but not needed. I've mentioned the normal leveling here. And for Shrink leveling, I've mentioned the items you can get. Tabula, Harvest Bite, Storm Cloud, 7 League Step, Karui Ward, Prison Weave, and 2 Barrack Scripts. Good enough. For Shrink leveling, you should be able to get something like 3 to 4 hours leveling time if you just rush through it. However, something to keep in mind for Shrink leveling, we are totally ignoring our life stat. That might be a bit annoying, you maybe need some help there. But let's take a look how we level this. Early on, we use Galvanic Arrow. Later on level 12, we're going to replace it either with Lightning Arrow if we are Shrink leveling, or with Rain of Arrows if we are normally leveling. The Rain of Arrows we use because we don't have access to Falling yet, so we don't have we don't need the Pierce, which Lightning Arrow would require. So we have Rain of Arrows, Mirage, Archer, Onslaught, have a nice amount of clear, or you can replace either one with added cold to have a bit more damage if needed, but that can very easily be gained with some uniques, which aren't that pricey at this point in the league. Or general items, you could just throw a few items, a few stuff on the bow to maybe get some flat damage. Once we reach level 16, we're going to use Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice, as well as Blood Rage, which we get there, but we won't be using there. Herald of Thunder will need Primal Spirit. Level 18, we can finally get the improved support gems, like Elemental Damage with Attacks and Trinity. Now, however, that is for Shrink leveling. For normal leveling, just Elemental Damage with Attacks is enough. You do want to temporarily replace either Mirage, Archer, or Onslaught with it, and re-add that once you get a Falling. Now, on level 24, either pick up Sniper's Mark or Elemental Weakness, based if you're Shrink leveling or not. Level 31, we can finally switch to Lightning Arrow if we are not Shrink leveling. We are getting access to Piercing Shots in our first lab, and now Lightning Arrow with LMP, Elemental Damage with Attacks, and Mirage Archer is going to clear the screen for us. For a single target, we will start using Barrage, Elemental Damage with Attacks, and added cold damage. If you have a second Falling and have access to Hypothermia, you can add that here too. For normal leveling, we are not yet using Trinity. That will wait a little bit longer. Once we get to level 38 and finishing Act 4, we get access to GMP instead of LMP. Once we get to Act 6, we can grab the rest of the gems we're still missing for our final setup and start leveling or using them. Once we get a 5-link, we can add Inspiration to our Lightning Arrow or Barrage, based if you want more clear or more single target. We can also add Mark on Hit to our Sniper's Mark, and we can now, if you were using Elemental Weakness up to here, you can now use Sniper's Mark. And when we get Charisma and the Mastery there, we can adjust our Aura setup from the Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice, to Grace, Defiance Banner, Herald of Ice Precision, and use the Hatred on our Life tab. Early on, you just use Hatred and Divine Blessing when you start a boss, and then immediately use a Life Flask, 1 or 2, depending how many you use. I would say 2 for leveling with that then. And later on, you do need Life tab 7. Later on, you can add Increased Duration once you get to maps. That's for the leveling section. I hope this guide was helpful. If you did enjoy it and end up playing Lightning Arrow, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe. It took me quite a while to get this done, to improve it to the state where it is really good, so you don't have to test all that what I was testing. And that being said, have a great day, and hopefully an awesome league. Goodbye.